That is our commander-in-chief in the scariest tightrope walk since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And on September 11th, we couldn't help thinking, wow, wouldn't it be wild if Ralph Nader, the Green Party, won and he was president and the Greens had to figure out what to do about this? And I caught myself thinking, well, at least there's somebody in there with some experience and know-how. And then I had to think, no, don't believe the hype. Stop. Look what they've done with their experience and know-how. They made a mess. Having people who think outside the box might not be such a bad idea in this case. I know we're all supposed to salute and march along because he's our president in a time of war, but I have no confidence whatsoever in Bush or his people to show any long-term wisdom or do the right thing in this situation. I can't help but have this image of him that's even kept me awake at night, of him running around loose in the war room or on the grounds of Camp David with his t-shirt pulled up over his head like Beavis in the cartoon. I'm the great Cornholio! I am the great Cornholio! Powell or Cheney picks him up by the collar. Sit down, George. We have wars to plan. We have people to kill. We have countries to annihilate. Then can I watch some baseball? Maybe have some pretzels? I mean, Bush is more like the national mascot than a president in a way. He's kind of like Reagan. He just reads his cue cards, and that's about all he does. We would have more luck if we sent Richard Simmons to the Middle East to try and make things right than this guy. Even his father gave him a no-confidence vote on national television right after the tragedies of September 11th. Is your son prepared for the task ahead? And Bush smiled that clenched teeth reptilian grin of his and, well, I don't know if anybody's ever prepared for something like this, but he has a great team around him. He has a great team around him. And it's the team that worries me. Dick the Dick Cheney, vice president, and probably the guy who's really running the country for all practical purposes, like Bush, a gentleman draft dodger who weaseled out of the Vietnam War. Well, when Cheney was Secretary of Defense during Bush's father's Middle Eastern War, he ordered then General Colin Powell to draw up plans to nuke Baghdad. Powell himself, as a young officer in Vietnam, helped cover up the My Lai massacre, one of the most notorious atrocities committed by American troops. National Security Advisor is Condoleezza Rice, who does seem smart as a whip when it comes to intricate theories of jousting with the old former Soviet evil empire, but needs to be reminded it doesn't exist anymore. Cheney, by the way, stained with oil from head to toe. He was president of Halliburton Oil and Construction, who were in the process of negotiating with our enemies, the Taliban, to build an oil pipeline through Afghanistan, feasibility study financed by Enron. As defense secretary, back then, Cheney changed the rules so that private companies could enter the picture during wartime, and a company called Kellogg, Brown and Root could start privatizing, building military bases, running the mess halls and the laundries and other things in places like Afghanistan and the other new military bases we've set up in the other countries around then. And Kellogg, Brown and Root are owned by Halliburton. And the Pentagon has admitted that if they'd done these jobs themselves, it would cost the American taxpayers billions of dollars less than what we're doing now. And Attorney General John Ashcroft is a hardcore fundamentalist, Bible-thumping Christian and not so closeted white supremacist who is such an asshole that voters in the state of Missouri elected a dead guy to the Senate in the 2000 election just to get rid of John Ashcroft. He has written his own patriotic anthem, which he sang on CNN. Let the eagle soar. Let the ego soar, because he now is reportedly demanding people sing it at work now, too. Said to be superstitious about the devilishness of calico cats. and is at least as obsessed with covering up women's bodies as the Taliban. So obsessed, in fact, that he spent $8,000 of taxpayers' money installing a giant blue velvet curtain to cover up a statue at Justice Department headquarters that had one bare metal breast. That way everybody had to focus on the boob at the microphone during the press conferences, I guess. And he has prayer meetings in his office before each day of work, and everything is done not according to the Constitution, but according to the Bible. And I fear this is maybe what Bush meant by faith-based initiatives. Remember that little buzzword where he said we were going to cut poor people's welfare budget even more than it's already been cut because churches will automatically help them out instead, which I think is a pretty dangerous concept if you're giving government money to the church too, or if somebody's homeless and cold and freezing and starving and knocks on the door of the shelter and the only way they can get any of that nice hot soup over there, that bed over there, is to pray to these people's God. That's a little smelly to me. And what if this whole goddamn war is a faith-based initiative? One of the most dangerous parts of it to me is not only do we have violent Islamic fundamentalist fanatics on one side, we have violent fundamentalist Christian fanatics representing what they say is our side. And what if some of these goofs get it in their heads that Jesus isn't going to come back till we have Armageddon and the rapture and Sharon's doing his part? We better get started on all this. Come on, George, push the button. In heaven, you can be commissioner of baseball forever and ever and ever. And both Bushes and Ashcroft have been calling for American intelligence to get back in bed with who they call unsavory characters. Bring back the good old days when there were no restrictions on us privatizing the work and contracting out the assassinations, the overthrows, the drug running to the mafia, the drug lords, our friends in the intelligence community. In a way, I suppose that doesn't surprise me because there's so many unsavory characters in the Bush administration. Anybody who knows their Countergate scandal trivia recognizes an awful lot of familiar faces in increasingly high positions. John Negroponte was ambassador to Honduras during the Contra War, where Reagan and his cowboys thought it'd be a real neat idea to overthrow the Sandinista government. 30,000 or more Nicaraguans died, most of them civilians, all kinds of drug running going on to finance it, crack hit South Central, and the rest is ugly history. And Negroponte was widely believed to have been the coordinator of that war and all the assassinations and atrocities. Do we round him up as a terrorist and lock him in a cage in Guantanamo Bay? No, we've made him ambassador to the United Nations. And again, I wonder how many things would be going so wrong today if we could resist the unsavory characters and their unsavory desires in the first place. For example, Iran in 1953, the CIA thought it would be a dandy idea to overthrow the democratically elected government of Mohammad Mossadegh and install the Shah back into power, who was lividly hated by his own people. So much so that he had to constantly wage military war against Iranian citizens, couldn't give them enough guns, couldn't give them enough torture devices. Finally, the Iranian people overthrew the Shah anyway, but at a great cost. The Shah literally killed off all moderate, non-religious opposition to his rule, so the only people who were organized who were left was violent, fundamentalist Muslim fanatics led by Ayatollah Khomeini. And once Khomeini and the mullahs got into power in Iran, violent Islamic fundamentalist uprisings began to erupt all over that part of the world and beyond. I can't help but wonder how much of this we'd be dealing with today if we'd left the Iranian people alone in the 1950s and let them elect their own government. Other unsavory characters we couldn't resist getting into bed with were the Mujahideen guerrillas in Afghanistan, who, according to Zbigniew Brzezinski, Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, in an interview published in France last year, he bragged that we started training, organizing, and arming those Mujahideen guerrillas 6 months before the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. We did it as a scam to try and trick the Soviets into falling into a war, and we didn't care who we used to get it. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, regardless of whether they think we're all infidels and want to kill us too. And besides, their dope is pretty good. Another interesting article from the British Guardian from September 29th, 2001 had this to say about the Afghan-Soviet War. In 1979, after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the CIA and Pakistan's ISI, Inter-Services Intelligence Spy Agency, considered the best in the region, launched the largest covert operation in the history of the CIA. Their purpose was to harness the energy of the Afghan resistance to the Soviets and expand it into a holy war, an Islamic jihad, which would turn Muslim countries within the Soviet Union against the communist regime and eventually destabilize it. When it began, it was meant to be the Soviet Union's Vietnam. It turned out to be much more than that. Over the years, through the ISI, the CIA funded and recruited almost 100,000 radical Mujahideen guerrillas from 40 Islamic countries as soldiers for America's proxy war. The rank and file of the Mujahideen were unaware that their jihad was actually being fought on behalf of Uncle Sam. The irony is that America was equally unaware that it was financing a future war against itself. In 1989, after being bloodied by 10 years of relentless conflict, the Russians withdrew, leaving behind a civilization reduced to rubble. Civil war in Afghanistan raged on. The jihad spread to Chechnya, Kosovo, eventually to Kashmir, where it's still going on, and India and Pakistan are on the brink of having a nuclear war now over it. We offered to look the other way at Pakistan's nuke program if they'd let us use their country to go fight people in Afghanistan, by the way. The CIA continued to pour in money and military equipment, but the overheads had become immense and more money was needed. The Mujahideen ordered farmers to plant opium as a revolutionary tax, quote unquote. The ISI set up hundreds of heroin laboratories across Afghanistan. Within 2 years of the CIA's arrival, the Pakistan-Afghanistan borderland had become the largest producer of heroin in the world, and the single biggest source of the heroin on American streets that were helping kill my friends. The annual profits, said to be between $100 and $200 billion, were plowed back into training and arming militants, including a young hothead with a real big trust fund by the name of Osama bin Laden. And after the Soviet Union was driven out of Afghanistan, did we finish the job? Did we go in there and so much as thank the Afghan people for allowing us to use their country as a killing field and all? Oh no, you made great corpses and cannon fodder, but see you later. Didn't rebuild the roads, didn't rebuild the cities, didn't even disarm all those different Mujahideen guerrilla groups who then took all the guns we gave them and fired on each other, kind of like they are today. They degenerated into rival warlords that were killing so many people, it made the Taliban look pretty good. When two different factions of the Northern Alliance, I would use the term loosely to describe them, were both fighting over control of Kabul, the capital, third of the city destroyed, 50,000 people dead. In that part of the world, our abandonment of the Afghan people is called the Great Betrayal. So if we think they're suddenly going to turn around and trust us in the Middle East and embrace Yankee-style democracy and Baywatch and McDonald's all of a sudden, we might want to think again. The United Nations Drug Control Policy Center reported in October, right after September 11th, that half the heroin still coming from Afghanistan, which is a lot, was coming from the 10% of the country then controlled by the Northern Alliance. And now that we've given most of the rest of the country back to them, poppies are springing up all over again. And even when the Taliban were running things and slaughtering their own people in a way only Pol Pot could love, we gave them $140 million a year in foreign aid and another $43 million bonus in the spring of 2001 as their reward for fighting drugs. Is this any way to win a war on terrorism? There's no way we will ever win a war on terrorism. And even if we did, what is victory? Israel's been fighting a war on terrorism since the minute of their birth. Have they won yet? Has the British government won their war on terrorism in Northern Ireland? I don't think so. If bombing civilians stops terrorism, why hasn't it stopped? Bush says, the only way to pursue peace is to pursue those who threaten it. What? What about negotiation? Too many syllables for King George? What about going over there and sitting down with all the different parties involved and try and get to the root of the problems? One government agency warned Bush when he first came into power, gave a report to the new president saying that thanks to further economic globalization, which they call free trade over here, regions, countries, and groups feeling left behind will face deepening economic stagnation, political instability, and cultural alienation. They will foster political, ethnic, ideological, and religious extremism, along with the violence that often accompanies it. Who gave that to the president? The CIA. He still didn't listen. Instead, we're fed these contradictory reports from September 11 onwards. One day, oh, we've already invaded. The special forces are in. The British SAS is in. We're already kicking ass all over those Afghani people. Next day, oh no, we haven't invaded yet. Next day, we say we have. Next day, Tony Blair comes out, we will not invade unless we are properly prepared. And finally tell the American people chomping at the bit and waving their flags, wanting to kill somebody, well, we haven't invaded quite yet because we need more intelligence. For once, I agreed with the Bush administration. So now we get these contradictory reports again. Oh, we've got the evil one quartered in a cave. Oop, guess he's not there. Oh, we got him this time. Oh, guess he's not there. We float these trial balloons. Hey, they might regroup in Somalia. Why don't we invade Somalia? It worked so well the last time. That didn't fly. We're going to go, how about Yemen? We've got advisors there now. Maybe we should conquer Sudan. Maybe everything will be all better if we kill Saddam Hussein. What this says to me is not that we're putting out all these contradictory messages to confuse an enemy in a part of the world where 75% of the people can't read. We have no idea what to do over there to keep the war on terrorism scam humming along and filling up the bank accounts. Overthrow the Taliban. Then what? The frightening thing is, bin Laden speaks for a lot more people. Millions more people. Why are their feelings against our very existence so intense? We aren't being bombed and threatened by African terrorists, even though we've treated that part of the world even worse than the Middle East. Not from South American terrorists, not even vengeful Vietnamese terrorists. Why this part of the world is it so intense that people are willing to blow themselves up just so they can blow a few of us up? They got nothing to lose in some cases. We need to not just study bin Laden, but feel bin Laden. I saw an interview with him about 3 years ago, like a fool I didn't save. But what struck me about it was he didn't come across as some frothing maniac out to destroy God, Mom, and apple pie. As scary and repulsive as most of his views were, the way he went point by point on what made him become what he is today, starting with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. He joined the jihad. Where would Osama be today if we'd never goaded the Soviet Union into invading Afghanistan? And he said he was further hardened by the Saudi royal family sending the army in to fire on and kill protesters in Mecca during the pilgrimage, a little before that. But then what really set him off was, of course, our big victory that was going to end all these problems, Gulf War #1. Where he was taking out his rage on the Saudi royal family once again for, as he put it, desecrating holy land, which he defines as the entire territory of Saudi Arabia, by allowing the infidel American troops to use their soil, use the air base, the big Prince Sultan surveillance base they have there, etc., to stage bombing raids and kill hundreds of thousands of fellow Muslims. That was what made him aim his sights on us and beyond. Also, one of his main goals at that point was overthrowing the House of Saud, the Saudi royal family, where he said that most of the people who were the monarchs in those countries weren't even native to that part of the world. They were plucked and installed by the British after World War I when they carved up what was left of the Ottoman Empire and redrew the borders almost at random in some places, creating a country called Jordan, which had never been a country like that before. Suddenly they have their own king. Created Iraq out of thin air, out of 3 different nations. Little research into this proved bin Laden was exaggerating a little bit. The House of Saud goes back hundreds of years, Kuwaiti royal family at least a couple hundred, but he was right in that those people were cemented onto the thrones by the British to make sure there would be pliant puppets to ensure a nice oil supply for us, the rest of the people who actually lived there, be damned. But over the years, how do you think the people there feel about their royal families? We're playing with fire over there. Saudi Arabia, most people, their income gone down 2/3 in the last few years, while the 5,000 people that make up the Saudi royal family making off with all the oil money. A few people would like to get rid of them. Same with Egypt, same with the rest. Pakistan. How do you think the dictator of that country must feel right now? Pervez Musharraf, he's got guns on both sides of his head. One on one side says, "You're either with us or with the terrorists. Don't mess with Texas." And the gun on the other side of his head are his own people, who are estimated by the European media to be 15% pro-Taliban, not just the Afghan Taliban, but a movement just like them in Pakistan that wants to run that country that way, that's also estimated to include the sympathies of 30% of the armed forces, including many top generals and the recently fired head of the ISI intelligence agency, who must have some very, very interesting friends. And Musharraf has admitted he can't control his own army, and the people who are going and shooting people in the part of Kashmir that India claims is theirs. India says, you control them or we're going to nuke you. What happens if these same generals who got rid of somebody else only 3 years ago to put Musharraf in power decide they can just as easily knock off him? Then do we have to aim our war on terrorism against a country of 140 million people who has the atomic bomb? What else borders Afghanistan? Iran, well, we tried to enlist them in the war on terrorism. They laughed us out of town. Gee, I wonder why. Then up above are these former Soviet republics like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and above there, Kazakhstan, supposedly sitting on more oil than Saudi Arabia is. Those places have barely figured out how to be countries at all, and they're all in the hands of corrupt dictators who are being opposed by armed, violent Islamic fundamentalists, if this sounds familiar. How much more of a fire are we going to light in those places if we invade Iraq? What's going to happen to our wonderful friends in Saudi Arabia or even in Egypt? One columnist in one of the British papers predicted that in the next 5 years, the opposition was already so intense that the governments of Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the Palestinian Authority were all going to fall to Islamic fanatics. I hope he's wrong, but that's the kind of fire we're playing with over there. And the rest of the people we trained in that jihad went back to their old countries and brought their new fighting skills and fanatic religious fervor with them. And so now what do you have? Violent Islamic uprisings stretching from Algeria, where it's been going on for years, and 100,000 people have died since the military moved to prevent a democratically elected Islamic fundamentalist government from taking power. Yes, people voted them in. All the way from Algeria to Egypt to Saudi Arabia to Pakistan to 2 different flashpoints in Indonesia now, another in the Philippines where we've already sent in troops who couldn't even rescue one American hostage right and killed one of the 2 of them. That's the amount of fire we are playing with over there. We go into Iraq, you think Ariel Sharon's going to wait 10 seconds before he tries to drive every Palestinian out of the West Bank, which some documents show he's already expressed the desire to do that, thus handing Osama bin Laden exactly what he wants: a world war between Islam and the West. And so far, he didn't get his billion new warriors for the jihad as soon as we bombed Afghanistan, but we go into Iraq, that's going to be another story, and there's no way the other side is going to win, but a hell of a lot of innocent people are going to die on both sides and come home in body bags. And I repeat, what will those people's children be like? We're going to be dealing with bombings and hate on a scale we can't imagine today for years and years and years to come. Then what? Then what do we do? I find myself agreeing with Michael Medved, of all people, that right-wing punditoid, when he wrote in the USA Today, "The American people must pursue prevention and protection, not punishment." Prevention and protection. Maybe starting with not just ending our dependence on foreign oil, but as much as humanly possible, ending our dependence on oil altogether. Why SUVs are a greater threat to national security than Osama bin Laden. It's not just that they put out 1/3 more pollution than the average car and eat up that much more gas, making us that much more dependent on foreign oil and thus dependent on keeping all the people in those foreign lands oppressed just so we can run off with their oil to power our yuppie swine mobiles. But those things pollute so much that what good is it going to do if you build a whole wall around all of us to protect us from terrorism if there's so many holes poked in our Swiss cheese of the sky we can't go outside anymore? Bush continues to fiddle while the world burns when it comes to global warming, but in the meantime, we can't. We still have to live here. There isn't going to be a rapture to take all of us to the great golf course in the sky with the rest of those people. Why spend so many hundreds of billions of dollars on Star Wars when you could be spending that money on safer airports and safer airplanes? Finally, a couple days after September 11th, I got a flight out of Memphis, Tennessee. The line to get through the security was 2.5 hours long. And you had people who looked like they were barely old enough to shave, going through every single piece of checked luggage, every carry-on bag, unfolding all the clothes, looking everywhere. But if you think standing in that line is monotonous, imagine having to do that job all day. In San Francisco, the people who run the metal detectors and look at our carry-on bags for weapons are the lowest paid people in the whole airport. We put it all in the hands of private corporations who are more interested in how much money they can squeeze out of the airline security industry than they are in protecting passengers from terrorist attacks. That's how seriously we really take airport security. So a bill goes through Congress to make it like it is in many European countries, a well-trained federal law enforcement agency that is paid well enough and trained well enough they know what to look for without delaying everybody else. Guess who tried to block that from going through? Bush and the House Republicans, because it would interfere with private company profits in airport security. And we could take a few lessons from El Al Airlines in Israel as well, to put all the checked-in luggage through what I guess it's a decompression chamber to simulate high altitude, so if there's an altitude-triggered bomb, it goes off on the ground in an area where nobody gets hurt. They have a plainclothes sky marshal on every flight, trained in breaking up hijackings, a far smarter solution than giving guns to pilots, I might add. Which many pilots don't want, I might add. I mean, they're talking about arming flight attendants, too. I mean, what if they mix up some of those foil bags? Would you like a snack? And it explodes on you. Some people said, oh, Jello, that's not punk rock. You're talking about cops and talking about making more rules. I'd rather have a cop on a flight than wind up dead. Thank you very much. And on top of that, El Al protects their pilots through not one but two bulletproof doors. And they've even reinforced the floors of the cabins of the plane, so if some clown comes in and tries to pull another episode of The Last Temptation of Reed and light his shoe on fire and blow the thing up, even an explosion may not down the aircraft. It all depends on what we're willing to pay for. On September 11th, the USA Today had, for that edition, their special pull-out travel section. And in it was a full-page ad from the Hitachi Corporation of Japan bragging about all the semiconductors they'd made that power those Japanese bullet trains. And I thought, well, I'm not that interested in semiconductors. I don't even have a computer. But I sure do like those trains. Imagine if we spent the Star Wars money on a national or international high-speed train system. San Francisco to Los Angeles in an hour. San Francisco to Mexico City in 2 or 3 hours. Same for New York. And you'd get to look at scenery on the way, too, and walk around in the train. And granted, the scenery would fly by at warp speed, but I'm sure you've seen enough MTV commercials at warp speed that you're used to looking at stuff like that with your attention span, right? And yes, you can hijack a train, but you can't fly it into buildings and kill thousands of people. Besides, trains are cool. And Ashcrack and Bushcroft are beating the drums for more security at our nuclear power plants, saying that's where the evil ones and Osama bin Werewolf may strike next. That won't be a problem if we shut them down. And as frightening and as insane as Osama bin Laden is, 2 of his 3 key demands are actually reasonable. Number 1, pull the U.S. troops out of Saudi Arabia. Most of the hijackers on those planes were Saudis. If it means that much to people there and they'll stop killing us, I think that's the small price to pay. Same with demand number 2. For crying out loud, isn't it time to end the sanctions against Iraq? Look how well they've worked. Saddam Hussein is still sitting pretty, still the evil one, while the estimated death toll of the Iraqi people since the Gulf War and the sanctions, conservative estimates 300,000, not so conservative between 1 and 2 million people. That's genocide. And we wonder why people in that part of the world hate our goddamn guts so much. Maybe that's a good place to start, Not just lift the sanctions, but go in there with some goodwill and feed the people. Bin Laden's third key demand is a lot less reasonable: total destruction of the state of Israel. But we sure as hell could be doing a lot more to get Ariel Sharon and his thugs to rejoin the civilized world. Would he really keep going crazy in the occupied territories if we and our allies cut off all military aid and recalled the ambassadors? He'd wise up in 10 minutes. On top of that, according to Professor Henry Thompson of Auburn University, all Israel would have to do to make up for all the military aid we give them would be to raise the income tax on their own people 5% a year. On top of that, we could be going to all those countries in the former Soviet Union and Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the rest, and instead of spending money on Star Wars, go in there where people are starving, but they're sitting on so many leftover Cold War weapons that sooner or later they're going to sell them to any old terrorist group just so they can get something to eat. Why don't we go over there and buy the weapons now and destroy them on sight so nobody gets to use them after that? Instead, we have a situation where in places like the little town of Dara Adam Kel near Peshawar, the Pakistani city right near the Afghan border, it's an open-air flea market for all the weapons we've dumped there. It's like instead of going to the flea market to look for weird records or old furniture or clothes or something or some tools, ooh, Kalashnikovs? Oh, he's got them over here. I'll take 50 of those. M16s, great. Surface-to-air missile launchers, and the missiles too. We gave 200 of them to the Mujahideen. The Taliban didn't keep them all. You can just buy them here. Grenades, cheaper than sugar. Why not? Why don't we go over there and buy that stuff up? And for that matter, isn't it time to get serious about disarming the whole world? Instead of being caught in this endless horse race of America versus Britain versus France versus Russia versus China, and yes, Israel, to see who can sell the most weapons to the most dictators and to the people opposing the dictators and the other heads of state, and when they start using them on each other, sell them some more. Look what we've done to Africa. Look what we've done to Africa. And on top of that, this time, we do have to finish the job. Bush and Rumsfeld are already saying we have no responsibility to rebuild Afghanistan. We're just going to throw them to the wolves and let the Northern Alliance kill each other again and again and again and expect it not to blow back and kill us in the end again and again and again through bombings or through heroin or whatever. Dropping 30,000 yellow plastic bags of food for one day that the local taste palates aren't even familiar with does not ease starvation in a country where the UN says as many as 7 million people are on the brink of starvation and all. We have to do more than that. Rebuild the roads, put the schools back in place. As Ralph Nader put it, we burned down the haystack and couldn't even find the needle. There's other ways of looking at this through history, too. World War I, what did we do for the German people after we clobbered the Kaiser? Nothing. Just left them there, rubbed them in their ruins of their country, and rubbed their noses in their own misery to the point where things got so bad for a while it took a wheelbarrow full of money to buy a loaf of bread. And people got so desperate and so bitter and so angry, they all but democratically elected Hitler to power. Then what happened? Well, we finally get rid of him, and at least we're a little smarter this time. This time we had the Marshall Plan to rebuild Germany and get Western Europe up and running again and stay in Japan a while, put it back together, install at least some semblance of a democracy. So why no Marshall Plan for the former Soviet Union? Instead, we've abandoned them too, and Russia itself is by and large run by gangsters where most people are starving. Surely we can do better than this. Right now, we spend 0.01% of our gross domestic product on foreign aid. Yet CNN took a poll and over half the people polled said we spend too much on foreign aid. This has to change. As Michael Moore put it, will we ever get to the point that we realize we will be more secure when the rest of the world isn't living in poverty so we can have nice running shoes? Instead, starting just about September 12th, we get all this hype saying, fight back, show they can't keep America down, fight terrorism, go shopping. But isn't it our appetite for shopping, for cheap bargain stuff that other people had to work like slaves to make so it would be cheap enough for us to go get at Walmart or whatever? Isn't that contributing to how much people hate us in other parts of the world? And on top of that, a lot of the people who poured into Afghanistan to join the jihad came from Pakistani schools called madrasas, religious schools created and financed by our friends, the Saudi royal family, whose own interpretation of Islam is along the Wahhabi lines and is almost as severe as the Taliban themselves, especially towards women. But hey, they have oil, we like them. Here they are building up these religious schools that take in people who don't have any money for another school, maybe don't have a home or a place to eat, take them in as children, they'll feed them, they'll shelter them, and instead of teaching them what we think of as an education, they study the Quran over and over and over again through the eyes of narrow-minded, fundamentalist religious clerics. So when they graduate from madrasas, they can hardly wait to go join the jihad and blow up some Americans and die and go indulge in the black-eyed virgins or whatever they teach them at the madrasas. Why are the madrasas so popular? They've multiplied in Pakistan faster than Starbucks does over here. Because the Pakistani government hardly spends any money on its own school system anymore. They've cut it and cut it and cut it to the point where most of the schools are closed. The ones that are still there, the windows are gone, desks, books, etc. are very hard to come by. Reason being, the Pakistani government cut education to put the money into their nuclear program and to pay off all the debts they have to the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Yes, there is a link between World Bank and IMF to international terrorism by helping create those situations in the first place. Fighting against the World Bank, the IMF, the WTO, the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas, and corporate dictatorship and privatization in general, that's not terrorism, it's fighting terrorism. Because those corporations, not only do they treat those people so bad, they are terrorizing them. When those people get mad enough to fight back, they don't take it out on the corporations, they take it out on us. Backbreaking poverty is a prime recruiting ground for radical movements for change, and violent, strong-armed put-downs of movements for change creates the desperation and rage that creates terrorists. I agree we should defend ourselves. This is an enemy that ain't going to sit down and negotiate. They want us dead, period. But again, defense, not offense, and defense means continuing to keep our eyes on the prize and not losing sight of all the other important things in the world that actually link into this. We can't let the fight against globalization become a casualty to the war on terrorism. At a time when the U.S. Conference of Mayors just released a report saying last year homeless people seeking shelter went up 13% in 1 year. In the fight to save our environment and clean it up, the fight to stop the death penalty at a time when people are finally waking up to how bad it is against the drug war and everything else, that shouldn't fall by the wayside. Right now, we're being told we have to accept a situation where everything is for sale. We are for sale. Our privacy is for sale. Our childhood is for sale. Even our genes are for sale. And somebody else can own them now. No, they can't. Don't believe the hype. We are patriotic citizens too because we care about the long-term effects of what we do and not just short-term ass-kicking to soothe our inner child. Patriotism is defined as love of country, caring about its people, caring about the environment and how we affect other people and their ecosystems. Patriotism does not mean giving blind loyalty and a blank check to George W. Bush. Therefore, it is our patriotic duty to guard this country against people hiding behind the flag and hiding behind War on Terrorism Incorporated and God Bless America Uber Alles, using the war on terrorism to terrorize us. Bullying the first neighbor who takes down their flag, that's not very patriotic. Brandon Cruz fronting the fake dead Kennedys, who according to an eyewitness report in Norfolk, Virginia, claimed that I was a terrorist and compared me to Osama bin Laden, claiming I didn't love my country because I was opposing the Bush regime. And then D.H. Peligro supposedly dedicated Holiday in Cambodia to our troops in Afghanistan, saying he supported the war. That's not patriotic. Censoring and silencing Bill Maher and talk show hosts like Peter Werby and trying to get people fired from universities just for saying something like maybe we should understand people over there. That's not patriotic. Giving more and more power to spy agencies and police already proven to be totally incompetent. That's not patriotic. The TIPS program, trying to create a united Stasi of America. Each of us rat on everybody else. Maybe even get a reward or forgiveness of our credit card debts or free trip to Disney World or something. That's not patriotic. These legislators in Florida, Pennsylvania, South Carolina saying to fight terrorism, we have to force every school kid to pray to a fundamentalist Christian God in school every day. That's not patriotic. Nor is the Army of God, who didn't make Ashcroft's current toilet paper roll long list of terrorist organizations, even though they sent over 200 envelopes of white powder to abortion clinics and family planning centers. I don't think they're very patriotic either. And I, for one, refuse to be bullied by all these people saying that because of September 11th, we can't laugh when something is funny anymore. Eminem dressed as Osama bin Laden. That is funny. Dick Cheney's security detail, leaving the plans in written form on how they were going to protect him at the Salt Lake City Olympics on the counter of a snowboard store. That is funnier still. John Ashcraft, in a PBS documentary slanted way far to the right, they said that Ashcroft was all ready to unleash a huge blitz against the adult video industry and online porn and all. If he really gets that obsessed with imposing Christian Taliban stuff in all our bedrooms, how about a million nude march on Washington? $1 million people rolling around on the Capitol Mall doing all those things Ashcraft says he doesn't like. Another 10,000 on his front lawn doing the same. That, my friends, would amuse me. You know the hip-hop group from Oakland called The Coup? They had a little mishap on September 11th, didn't they? Had to stop the press and have a new cover put into their new album because the old cover showed the Twin Towers blowing up on the front. Oops. Scott Ian of the metal band Anthrax moans and groans that he felt so bad about terrorism and the anthrax scare that he was thinking of changing the band's name to Basket Full of Puppies. Saying like, I feel like it's 1937 and my name is Freddie Hitler or something. Jerry Falwell, always good for a laugh, assumed the high comic throne when he claimed that the Teletubbies was pushing the homosexual agenda because Tinky Winky carried a purse. Remember that one? Well, both he and Pat Robertson agreed with Osama bin Laden on September 11th, saying the towers went down because God is mad at America. Bush and the pretzel. Try not to laugh. Try real hard. And then think, why would they even admit that happened? Here was our supposedly strong, rootin' tootin' cowboy president, and he chokes on a pretzel. The only reason they're going to admit that in public maybe is because something a lot worse gave him that scar on his cheek. Was it a fight with the missus? Was it blacking out because he was indulging in one of those substances he says he doesn't indulge in anymore? Also, the reports that several of these hijackers were seen days before the hijackings getting drunk in titty bars. That doesn't sound very Islamic to me. But so far, the Excellence in Comedy Award for the War on Terrorism has to go to your friend and mine, the Clear Channel Corporation, who, thanks to deregulation laws and the Telecommunications Act of 1996, rammed through once again by the Clinton-Gore regime with help from Newt Gingrich, deregulated the laws about ownership of the airwaves, which are technically belong to the public, so that now, instead of being only able to own one radio station, one TV station per city, you can own as many as you want to. So Clear Channel now owns 1,200 stations, 10% of the total, and they pipe in the same dreck and horrible music and dumbed down, almost non-existent right-wing slanted news reports, and people wonder why we want pirate radio and we want internet radio. We want underground music and underground performances so you don't have a situation where Clear Channel owns the radio station and Clear Channel owns the venue and owns the promotion company and only Clear Channel events can be advertised on Clear Channel radio stations. Wrong. But they still have the comic relief ward because somebody with way too much time on their hands took it upon themselves to make a list and send it out to all these Clear Channel stations, listing all the songs they felt shouldn't be played on the air anymore because they might make people think of terrorism and the tragedies of September 11th. So now, at least on Clear Channel, listeners are free from being terrorized by Obla Dee, Obla Da by the Beatles. On Broadway by the Drifters. Johnny Angel by Shelley Fabre, maybe the worst song I've ever heard in my life, even worse than Sheryl Crow. So maybe Clear Channel's doing us a favor here. I mean, after all, 3 Elton John songs had to go too. Now you can listen to Clear Channel and not be terrorized by Benny and the Jets, Daniel, or Rocket Man. I mean, that's doing me a favor. I heard one Elton John song once and I never ever wanted to be terrorized by him again. Also on the Clear Channel list, you won't be terrorized by What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong. Or, come on people now, smile on your brother, everybody get together, try and love one another right now. Banned! Like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay me down. Not anymore. Banned. Might make people think of terrorism if you do that. Cat Stevens gets nailed too for terroristic images like Peace Train. And Morning Has Broken. Rock the Casbah is banned. All Rage Against the Machine is banned. Imagine by John Lennon is banned. New York, New York by Frank Sinatra is banned. And Not a Moment Too Soon for some of us, I might add. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. Gone. Banned. Terroristic. Wouldn't it be far better for our homeland if we put that kind of thought and energy into shortening the war on terrorism and pulling the plug before we invade Iraq and make the stupidest foreign policy mistake of our entire lifetimes in the process, burning every bridge we have over there and planting the seeds for that many more Osama bin Ladens and suicide bombers and all? I know right now there's a lot of bullying going on, but look how many people showed up at the first organized anti-war protest in San Francisco. We're almost at anti-Gulf War numbers already. That's a good sign. It kind of feels, though, like those voices in the wilderness in 1964 after the Gulf of Tonkin resolution went through Congress at a time when people really were scared of communism because we'd just gone through the Cuban Missile Crisis, saying, wait a minute, the Vietnam War is wrong, it should stop, we should get out of there now. Their reward was to be beaten, fired, called communists, traitors, peaceniks, pinkos, faggots. But in the long run, against incredible odds, the whole military-industrial complex and the hierarchies of both the Democratic and Republican parties aiming at the American people with both barrels, if that sounds familiar, the American people rose up and stopped the Vietnam War. We've done it once, we can do it again. One veteran of the anti-war movement I know said in his estimation, there were only 3,000 to 5,000 full-time shock troops and organizers fighting against the Vietnam War. It wasn't a 51% majority of a country of 220 million people, but it got the job done. We can do it again. We did it a lot quicker in the first Gulf War, too, didn't we? That one didn't even last a month before King George I pulled the plug on Gulf War #1 and stopped the troops at the Iraqi-Kuwaiti border, wouldn't let them go any further, even though General Schwarzkopf and Cheney and the rest of them were just chomping at the bit to go into Iraq and do a General Sherman job on Basra and destroy Baghdad and hopefully kill enough people that Saddam Hussein just might be one of them. But we didn't go that far. Why? Because the opposition got so intense and so fierce and so big so fast. Not just in San Francisco, but in small-town America, small-town Canada, Britain, France, Germany, Western Europe, you name it. There were protests in the streets, even in dictatorships like Syria, Algeria, Egypt, even though the corporate media hype was saying 90% of Americans love the Gulf War and love King George I. They knew it wasn't true, and they damn well better shut it down before things get any worse. Plus, Bush I had promised other people who'd entered into that alliance with him, not just the Arabian oil sheiks, but Britain and France and Germany and the rest, that we wouldn't go past the Kuwaiti-Iraqi border. The purpose was not to overthrow Saddam Hussein, it was to get Iraqi troops out of Kuwait. And they held him to that promise. I'm sure John Major in Britain wouldn't have cared at all, although Saddam Hussein had a great quote right around the time of the Gulf War, accusing Margaret Thatcher of vomiting poison like a spotted serpent. I don't know whether he really said that or not, but it's the best description of Thatcher I've ever heard. But even if John Major or Helmut Kohl in Germany, they wouldn't have cared if Bush broke his promise and went in and went nuts in Iraq, but they knew that their people did care. Their people held their leaders to holding Bush from doing any more damage than he already did. So if you know people overseas, email them, write them, talk to them, however you like to communicate. Let them know how important it is they keep the pressure on their leaders not to fall in with King George II in a disaster into Iraq. Even Tony Blair, who's Bush's big cheerleader for the war on terrorism so far, he seems to think he's Winston Churchill while King George thinks he's John Wayne. Urge people in other countries to save America from America and thus save the rest of the world as well. They already know who we are, TIPS program or not, so don't get quiet, get louder and louder and louder. The spirit of Seattle ain't dead, it's just changing a flat tire and is very much alive in other parts of the world. Italy just had their first general strike in many, many, many years. Wouldn't you love to see a general strike here? That might teach Enron a lesson. Nigeria. Oil company platforms belonging to Chevron and Shell and people like that are being seized non-violently by groups of Nigerian women. Quebec City, spring of 2001, where they had the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas meeting with all the heads of state except Castro there, 70,000 protesters. That's 20,000 more than Seattle. Blacked out of the news down here, but there it was a very, very powerful event. And to my eyes, 95% of the signs the marchers were carrying were in French. And French is the sole official language only in one province in Canada, Quebec. And if that many people in one area are that pissed off about phony free trade, which is really a corporate coup going on, I see a lot of hope in that, in a way. Quebec City kind of surrounds a plateau, and the old part of town and the big hotels are on the plateau. They even admitted that fake free trade isn't even capitalism anymore, it's feudalism. New feudalism. They put up a moat this time. They put up a moat of these giant cement barriers with chain link fence on top. I do have to admire the courage of the people in the black masks that particular day, unlike the undercover cops in black masks beating the protesters later on in Geneva in Italy. Watch out for that one in the future. If you're with the FBI or with TIPS, you don't even have to disguise yourself as a radical freak anymore. Just put a mask on. This isn't good. But anyway, the people in the masks there, they were the first ones who took on the cops, broke through the barrier finally, and the Canadian cops, with some American military help we wouldn't admit to, instead of beating the crap out of everybody with clubs the way they did in Seattle, they went way overboard with gas, not paying attention to the wind, and the wind blew the gas into the hotels, trapping Bush and his entourage, among others, in their rooms from 5 p.m. until the next day. So that's another moral of the story. Not only come prepared at these protests if the cops are going to go crazy, bring your own helmet, bring your own shield, bring your own mask, but watch the weather and think military strategy. Stage a preemptive strike, the cops throw the gas gets blown on to the evil ones, the corporate evil ones. And then last April, Porto Alegre, Brazil, they have another globalization meeting. 50,000 protesters show up. So around the world, it is very much alive. As Noam Chomsky points out, we are not a free country in a relative sense because of the good hearts of wealthy people and corporations who gave them to us. We have them because we fought for them. Keep in mind also that right now overseas, they're not down with our war on terrorism and our proposed invasion of Iraq. They're worried far more about terror and its consequences from oil-stained warmongers in cowboy hats than they are from anybody in a turban. Chancellor Schroeder in Germany, for example, said Germany is willing to accept risks also in military terms, but not adventures. And what Bush and his cowboys clearly want is an adventure. But unfortunately, September 11th has fueled so much racism and anti-immigrant backlash in Europe that even the relatively slightly progressive leaders may go down one by one because of how clever and manipulative the organized racists are, especially in Holland and Germany and even places like Denmark, let alone France. But one country, such as Britain, not going along with an invasion of Iraq, that's all it takes to derail the whole scam. Like legs of a table, break off one leg, table spills over, scam is over. This worked beautifully in the not-so-distant past when the people who gave us the GATT treaty and the WTO, not even that was enough. They had to have something worse. So they were negotiating in secret the MAI, Multilateral Agreement on Investments, make it so not only individual countries can go to the WTO to nuke other countries' laws if they don't happen to like them, but corporations could go there too. Go to the WTO and say, we want blood money from this country for, quote, interfering with their right to profit through such things as minimum wage laws, environmental regulations, labor safety regulations, the right to organize a union, that would have to go. Any rights preventing Rupert Murdoch, Mickey Mouse, and Clear Channel from taking over the rest of the world's media too, that would have to go. There was even a clause in the MAI saying that a corporation could shake a country down for blood money, no matter how poor that country was, for failure to quell civil unrest against the corporation. Well, some whistleblower leaks the text of the MAI treaty and what its purpose is onto the internet in France, and all hell breaks loose. Some over here through Global Exchange, Public Citizen, some of the unions. But in France, it got so hot, so much opposition, that the French government caved in and pulled out of the MAI treaty. And without France, the treaty was deemed unworkable, negotiations collapsed. They called the whole thing off. Solid proof that grassroots resistance can work. And then corporations decided, okay, we'll see how much of the MAI we can sneak into the GATT treaty, as it's written already, at the WTO meetings in Seattle. They never got that far. Too many people caused too much trouble in the streets. And those of us who were there, we had a great time too. So they figure, okay, we'll show them. We're going to have the new WTO tribunal in Qatar. Tiny little Persian Gulf oil sheik kingdom out on a peninsula in the middle of nowhere. Even there, they weren't safe. All these things they were trying to adopt into the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, the GATT treaty that created the WTO, they couldn't get it all in because the trade minister of India kept stonewalling and protesting and filibustering. Why? Because, according to the Wall Street Journal of all people, 25,000 protesters hit the streets in New Delhi and sent him a message right before he got on the plane to go to Qatar. Again, grassroots resistance can work. The way to get through to people on an individual basis that the war on terrorism is wrong is, number one, forgive the flags. We have freedom of speech in this country, number one, and it's a lot of people with good hearts just trying to express their grief and solidarity towards the victims and their families of an undeniable tragedy that is very real. On the other hand, the way to get through, even to people with the flags, that the war on terrorism is wrong, is to point out its piss-poor military strategy. All we're doing, even now in Afghanistan, let alone a badass invasion of Iraq, is planting the seeds for more bin Ladens, more Al-Qaedas, and more suicide bombers, thus making our own country and our own homeland less and less and less safe. That is not good military strategy. Bin Laden says, you kill me, 100 more will grow on my place. We've already got 1,000 more, and it's growing and growing and growing. We don't want to create more bin Ladens, even if it means waging peace to do it. One by one. Don't wait. Don't wait for Nightline or MTV or Fox News to persuade people that the war is poor military strategy. Don't hate the media, become the media. Not just with the underground zines and the independent media center and pirate radio and pirate TV, but one-on-one with people you know at home, work, school, family. Sit down with them, talk to them, They spout Rush Limbaugh, George Bush, anti-immigrant, racist, anti-welfare bullshit. Don't dismiss them as unreachable. Sit down and talk to them. Even my girlfriend's stepmother, who's so far off the right-wing Republican scale, she's devoted a wing of the trophy home she lives in to a Republican museum with memorabilia of Reagan and Bush #1 and every different version of the American flag ever made, original editions and all. My girlfriend pointed out to her why the war on terrorism was poor military strategy. Even that woman stopped and said, you know, that's a good point. That is the way to get through to people that the war on terrorism is wrong. Bush is now scheduled sending 200,000 to 300,000 ground troops into Iraq for February. Not all of them are going to come home in anything but a body bag, so now is the time to start getting through to people that not only is the war on terrorism wrong, it needs to be opposed, actively opposed. As they say in show business, let's roll. Because now of all times is not the time to run around the world playing cowboy.